Hi friends! Today we're going to be looking at a question from one of my patrons over on Patreon. That's a thing that I have now, which is kind of weird to me, but so it goes. Dennis asked about being nice and the value of being nice if it's motivated by a fear of bad things happening, right? What's the value of nice behavior if it's arising out of a fear of social consequences rather than a genuine desire to do something kind for somebody? And he introduced me to the word scrupulosity, which is a great word. I love it. I thought it was made up at first, but apparently it's a word for an obsession with doing the right thing, usually as determined by some religious or moral authority. And that's a whole deep well that one could go down, but it sort of touches on the character of this experience, that it's not necessarily serving the well-being of the person who's behaving in this way to be nice or do the right thing. Now, my first sort of gut response to this is there's no value in that. I think anybody who's known me for a while would attest that I'm not a nice person. I can be a kind or generous or caring person. I can be a compassionate person, but I'm definitely not nice. And that's a distinction that I'm very eager to draw whenever the subject comes up, because I think it's a really important one. Because, for me, my reading of the word nice is somebody who is nice is somebody who applies upsetting another person as an absolute constraint on their behavior, right? So if they're looking at a slate of potential responses to some circumstance in their life, all the ones that potentially upset somebody, they're gone. They're off the table. That is very much not my way, because I think that is, as an approach, highly likely to undervalue taking care of the well-being of the person who's actually trying to figure out how to act. For me, upsetting people is an important consideration. We should always be mindful of how our behavior affects the state of other people, how it impacts their well-being. That has to enter into consideration. It has to be part of the calculus of decision-making. But it can't rule the calculus of decision-making. We need to have a holistic picture that takes into account also what takes care of our well-being, what takes care of the well-being of other parties, and not just focus on the person most likely to explode in any given situation. Now, it happens that this is a pet peeve of mine. I grew up in a household where a lot of my childhood was spent being responsible for maintaining the state of other people, who would very much become explosively angry if anything didn't go their way. So it's really not sort of a part of my deal, because it's the first self-care taking task that I learned is the recognition that my responsibility is to take care of my well-being and my mental state. And other people, have to attend to their mental state. We can't be responsible for the state of other people. It's just not a sustainable task. And that really brings me to what I think is the crux of this matter is you can't be sustainably kind to others until you're consistently kind to yourself. So just as a matter of keeping the holistic picture in mind and really attending to what takes care of everyone, the first place you have to begin is taking care of yourself. You cannot take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself. So, finding a way to make the decision-making calculus include all people, including yourself, especially yourself, in the consideration of the well-being, and then from there, taking the action that most reflects kindness, generosity, compassion. I think that's a much better mode than this sort of reflexive default, do the super nice thing because I'm afraid that otherwise people won't like me. And while we're here, let me just touch on that for a moment. I have been an asshole for most of my life, and people still like me. Nobody's more confused by that than me. But if you hear a voice in your head saying, oh, but if I'm not nice, people won't like you, that is definitely a lie. People are strange. People like people for a lot of interesting reasons. And surprisingly, being nice doesn't actually rate very highly. I don't know that it should be that way, but that seems to be the way that it is. So, Dennis did ask about some practices that we can do to sort of attend to this issue, right? And I really would recommend keeping that distinction between sort of being kind, which is arising from a careful consideration of everyone's well-being, and being nice, which is arising from a fear of upsetting someone. Keeping those two things separate, trying to move towards being kind as a practice as opposed to being nice. How do we do that? Well, the first place to begin, I think, is having a consistent sort of behavioral postmortem. Most of us are not cognitively prepared to make interventions in our behavior in the moment where the behavior arises at the beginning of our practice, and even in the middle of our practice. It's for a very long time, it's going to be all after action reports and trying to come up with a plan for the next time. So setting aside a time every day to really run through what happened today, how did I behave, and what did that arise out of? And where you find situations where behaviors arose of being nice because of fear, then making a plan for, under those conditions, how do I want to behave? Or how do I want to experience this? Now, it may be that the behaviors are not radically different. It may just be a small tweak to make sure that, consideration for your well-being is in the picture too. But having that time where you reflect on it, see what the drivers were of the behavior, and then making a plan so that you don't have to come up on the spot with how you're going to proceed. You say, okay, if this happens again, this is what I want to do. Now, probably the next time that happens again, you won't follow the plan. That's fine. The plan is a structure that gives you insight into how deviations arose from it. So it can be an iterative process to move towards the plan. But that's a practice to begin sort of shaping these behaviors. Now, in the very long run, the goal is to reshape your experience sufficiently that you don't experience fear there. And that's a hard thing to do because, we have these pattern recognition engines just running in our mind continuously saying, this is this sort of situation, this is this sort of situation. And it's all like profoundly unconscious processing. And so the assessments of these pattern recognition systems just arise in our mind. And sometimes, there may be uncertainty, there may be competing interpretations that just pop up in our mind. And we have to sort of, by some process, one of them is selected as the way that we experience a given set of circumstances. But within the scope of what's possible for human beings as mind users, is being present for the moment when that assessment first arises, before that assessment begins to create the physiological changes that are associated with a fear response. Because once fear is going, your brain as an information processing system has changed. And it's changed not irrevocably, but sort of non-reversibly over a short time horizon. So, once you're afraid, the next few minutes are going to be radically reshaped, maybe even, going out as far as the next few hours, depending upon how intense the fear response is, how long it takes your body to dissipate all the, endocrine interventions, adrenaline and other hormones that have gone on from that fear response, right? So once the fear response is going, that changes the way that we perceive everything. It's very hard to have a behavioral intervention there. We practice that. That's why we have the plan and we try to stick to the plan. But in the long run, if you're practicing diligently, if you're doing especially meditative exercises, what's going to happen is you're going to actually be able to perceive changes in your mental state more granularly, and you'll actually see the moment when the assessment, this is a time to be afraid, arises in the mind, and be able to intervene there and go, no, this is not that time. And then you don't have the physiological responses, you have the normal clarity of mind, not driven by fear, and then you get to make a free choice in that moment. So that's an aspirational vision. That's the result of a tremendous amount of practice, and it's a good reason to really stay stuck in with the practice, especially the meditative practices, which are hard. So that's a vision for the very long term. So in the short term, integrating a postmortem into your daily routine, where you just sort of sit down and say, what were the events that transpired today? What were they arising from? Where they aren't arising from, attending to what takes care of your well-being and what is sort of the path of greatest kindness available to you in that moment. Make a plan. How, in the future, when a similar situation arises, am I going to behave differently? Understanding that the plan is something that you iteratively move towards achieving, not something that you're going to get on the first pass. The plan is a tool to guide the reshaping of your behavior. It's not something that you're just going to go out and execute on. That's the short-term practice. In the long-term practice, keep at it with the meditative practice, right? Keep at it with sharpening your ability to perceive the fine-grained changes of state within your mind and to intervene in those changes of states, which we get, from diligently, day by day, staring at the wall, peering into the void, and really digging into the stuff of what it takes to be a happy human being. Apply. Focusing stick. Shift to the right. Shift hat back just a tiny bit. Move a little bit forward. Refocus. Out of concern. Moving forward. Okay, we got this. We have to remember the question and then all the things we wanted to say about the question. We probably should have written this down. Yeah, but